Hello and welcome to the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club. I'm Marlo Artist. The Tar Heel Teachers Book Club is our monthly opportunity to dissect and discuss great books. Each month I'm joined by a wonderful panel of educators who love doing just that. We'll start our introductions with our friend from Alamance County.
Hello, I'm Kelly Polkat, the 2021 Burroughs Welcome Fund Piedmont Triad Region Teacher of the Year and a K-5 music educator at the Alamance Virtual School and Alamance Burlington School System. Please join me on Twitter at KA Polkat.
Hi, I'm Pamela Sands. I'm a former school media coordinator and current digital learning facilitator. I am a two-time winner of both the Cumberland County Schools Media Coordinator of the Year and the North Carolina School Library Media Association's Media Coordinator of the Year. You can follow me on Twitter at LivingPamtastic.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Arisha Smalls. I'm the Elementary AIG Program Specialist for Cumberland County Schools, and you can follow me on Twitter at Smalls Arisha.
Hi, I'm Amy Tart. I teach fourth grade ELA and social studies for Clinton City Schools, and you can follow me on Twitter at Cards for Scholars.
Great. This month on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club, we are spotlighting North Carolina educators who are also published authors. First up, we are chatting with Jeremy White, the 2021 North Carolina Charter School Teacher of the Year and author of two titles, Estelle and Gustoff, and In His Shadow, Growing Up with Reggie White. Jeremy, welcome to the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We're really excited to chat with you and glad that you can help to kick off this special episode. So the idea for Estelle and Gustoff, it started percolating back in 2008 and it was published in 2018. So tell us about the path to publishing your children's book.
So when I started getting the idea for it, I was at a daycare, and it was the year before I left for Japan. It was right after I had graduated from Elon University with my degree in journalism. And while I was at the daycare, it was my first foray into watching little kids for this long as a full-time job, not just volunteering here and there. And, at the end of the day during pickup, that first year teachers are not ready for that extended amount of time that doesn't have instruction or some sort of routine. So they started asking me to tell them a story. So I started just grab bagging anything and everything. And it got to the point where the parents started showing up early and I thought they were showing up to pick their kids up. And they said, no, we want to hear how this story ends. So one of the little girls that was 3.5-year-old at the time, she's almost 18 now. She was the one who kept pushing me. When are you going to publish this book? When are you going to publish this book? The character is based off of me and this, that, and the third. So what ended up happening was I put it on the side for a little while. And then in 2011, I just sat down and took all my notes and took 2.5 hours and just did the 1,500 words in rhyming form and just knocked it out. And then had the illustrations from a friend of mine that I had met who teaches art in Detroit. I met him while I was in Japan. And he told me he really taught me how to let the pictures tell the story because I'm used to journalism and I'm typing up all these great descriptions. And he goes, Jeremy, this is a book for kids. They're not going to read 1,500 words. And then finally in 2018, I thought I had already got it copyrighted at the Library of Congress. And I looked up how to just self-publish through Amazon, through Kindle. And I said, I'm just going to do it. I thought to myself, if anyone buys it, if people like it or not, it's something I can read with my own child one day. And then I just went ahead and pulled the trigger and did it. And I'm just really happy to have it in my hands.
Mm-hmm. It's a really great book. And I love the read aloud that you did. It was so well produced. What questions do we have for Jeremy?
Jeremy, I was wondering, there's just a lot of whimsy and variety in the animal characters that you chose. Were the specific animals chosen for a reason? Because I love that there was like a dinosaur and then like a hippopotamus.
So they were all based on my kids' personalities at the daycare. So I'm having a hard time remembering who exactly was what, but I assigned a character for each kid so they had a way to connect with the story that I was telling. Because they were interested in how I was doing. The voices, they weren't really following the story that well. But once I brought up the dancing bear or the deer with underpants or the dinosaur, they were all like, "That's me, that's me, that's me." And to this day, the 3-foot tall elephant comes from the little girl I taught who has since been diagnosed with Asperger's. And she is always like that's me because I was little, because she was a preemie. And she has always been the smaller one in her group. And she loves Horton Hears a Who. So the elephant really came from her. And in fact, she is one of the reasons I've written sequels and things to it. I haven't got those fully developed yet, but she has actually been helping me with some of the canon of where the characters are coming from, what region of the world they actually could be in, how Estelle and Gustoff, being multi-race, being together, how that actually would work if we were really putting this on Earth. And she was explaining to me about the ages of the planets that that the days of the week are named from. She goes, if you end up doing the 7 elves and based off of this, she goes, put them in this order, because she was the one who stayed up late reading books, that were meant for teenagers while she was 5. So she just has so much knowledge. But yeah, they were all based on a student.
Now, your other book about growing up with your dad, is that one that you have self-published also, or what was your process for that one?
So that one was more of a who you know kind of thing. I'll give you a little backstory on it first. I had come home from Elon at winter break my freshman year in 2004, and I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm tired of people asking me what it's like to be Reggie White's son. What do you think if I just wrote a book? Like, that'd be great. And then I could just hand it to him, right? And I loved writing. And she said, Jeremy, I think that's a great idea. And I was thinking, okay. And so I wrote the first chapter. The first chapter wasn't the first chapter that it ended up being. It was when my mom and dad had met and how they had their first date at a Bojangles. And I wrote that chapter out. And then a week later, my dad passed. And I was like, I've got to get this written. And so I worked on it. And we got it edited and things right before he went to the Hall of Fame. But my mom had a connection with Sports Publishing LLC, which is now defunct. So it was, in a way, it was self-published, but it was through a publishing company because she had just a connection with that. But I was very proud of the way that book turned out, because originally one of my mother's connections wanted that to be edited by an anchor at ESPN, and they would have made it more of a football book and not a Jeremy book. And I got very blessed that my literary magazine, newspaper, creative writing teacher from high school was the one who edited that book for me. So she knew my voice already. And her hardest part was taking all of my thoughts and kind of putting them in order. And I was actually telling Kelly this a couple of weeks ago. She sat me down. She goes, you're talking about growing up with your dad, but all I can hear is stories about your mom. And so we need to do something about that. But yeah, that's how that came about as far as publishing.
That's really great. And it's wonderful. You have 2 books, 2 really distinct books, and I'm glad to hear that you have some more in the works. So if you would like to purchase one of Jeremy's books, please visit the links in the description box of this video. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And go back to your earlier thing. If you guys don't want to read them to your kid, I do have, I don't know if you guys have the link of the Read Aloud on YouTube, but that was my first foray into that production. I did the whole thing, and that wasn't even my thing. And I really enjoyed making that.
And it really shows, and it was so well done. We'll be right back. We are back on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club, and we're now being joined by Chris Gilbert, a 5th grade teacher in Wake County and the author of Once Bitten, the Apex Project. Chris, welcome to the show.
All right. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're so glad to talk with you about the book. Kelly, what is your question for Chris?
Chris, I love how you combined your love of reading and zombies for this book to come together. You mentioned what I read about is that you kind of wrote this about in 2 months' time and then edited it and such. Was it percolating in your brain for a long time, or did it just come to you and you had to get it out?
Yes, ma'am. So I was always thinking about wanting to write a book that was centered around my hometown of Apex, North Carolina. I was born and raised here, and now I'm a teacher. And so I always knew I wanted to write a novel. And then when the pandemic hit, I was riding in the car, and the DJ talked about all these things that you should do now that you have more time on your hands. And we were teaching virtually, doing a lot of asynchronous teaching, so not a lot of live teaching from March until June. And so I finally had time to sit down and really write. And the zombie love comes from my favorite show, The Walking Dead. And so that was what inspired it. But I would say that in the start of the pandemic, kind of just put all the ideas together and began there in March of 2020.
I also enjoy The Walking Dead. I could talk to you for hours and hours about that, but that's
Yes.
not what this show is about.
That's
So
right.
what,
That's right.
being from Apex and then writing a book set there, what Apex landmarks can we expect in your book?
So we tried to hit on downtown Apex is a really popular area here in the town. It's a town, but it's really a city now. But the kind of the shops that are down there and some of the famous streets that are here in Apex, and then the water tower. And then we just hit on just a couple of landmarks like my childhood home and my elementary school that I teach at, but also went there. So those were some of the things that we wanted to hit on once we started writing the book, where we definitely wanted to hit on the big things that Apex is kind of popular or known for.
Very cool.
So fifth grade is one of my favorite grades that I've ever taught. I was in that grade for 6 years. So I wanted to ask, like, what do your fifth graders think about their teacher writing a novel, and if they read it?
Quite a bit have read it. I know, especially last year's group, when it first came out, we were virtual when the book was published last fall. And so really once they got back to school full time, which was, more in the spring of this past year, that's when I saw a lot of them reading the book. That's when it really hit me, was they were here in my class reading the novel and asking me a lot of questions about it and what's happening next in the book kind of thing. And this year it's kind of carried over because the fourth graders now know a lot about it as before they come to me into my classroom. And so yeah, it was really cool. It really hit me once we came back in person last year to see them reading the novel.
Now, Chris, would you love to, and now if I wrote a book, which I am writing a book, but if I were you, I would love to actually do it as a class novel. Is that something that you're considering, like doing it as a whole group with all of your students?
Do you mean just kind of drafting one and getting feedback from them, or do you mean kind of using them as characters?
Or actually just using your book and teaching your book to your students to teach the standards?
Oh, yes. I've done, there's some other really good novels that I have to continue to read, obviously as part of our curriculum here in the state, but I do try and do a little bit of kind of fun read aloud. And so once bitten, I do read to them a few chapters at a time. We're only about halfway through the book. So that's been really cool to read it to them out loud. Just don't have a whole lot of time with kind of how rigorous the curriculum is. So I try to fit in as much as I can, but they read a lot of it during independent or kind of partner read time.
I was curious, you were saying your kids enjoy reading it and they ask you a lot of questions. So do you kind of stockpile their questions so as you are developing like maybe a sequel or so, you can think about the things that they want answered in your next books?
Well, the most common question I get is, Mr. Gilbert, you're going to use me as a character in your next book. That's the one that they are, teachers and students, that's the one that they're most concerned with. But yes, they do have a lot of questions, and the book kind of ends in a cliffhanger that goes into a potential sequel. My co-author, Nolan Heath, who I met in college at UNC Wilmington, him and I just kind of decided we wanted to leave it kind of hanging. So a lot of the kids had questions at the end of the book going into a potential sequel. So that's what we wanted to, that's their most questions though, that and can they be in the novel as a character.
I feel like the title Once Bitten leads to like really fun things for the title for the second one, like
yes,
twice chased, or like it's got to be twice something. I don't know. So are you playing with titles for the second book?
Yes. Well, Twice Bitten has been one that it seemed like a lot of students were like, oh, that would be a really good one to have as another title. And in the book, without saying too much, there's a scene that happens where once bitten occurs, and so the character kind of lives from that. And so the sequel would have to entice and have to do something with someone getting twice bitten somehow and surviving, basically, without saying a whole lot.
So stay tuned. So we have to check it out and see what happens next. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. To purchase Once Bitten, please visit Chris's website, chrisgilbertbooks.com. We'll be back in a moment.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Our next guest on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club is Julie Hart, a second grade teacher in the Winston-Salem-Forsyth County School System. She's also the author of Letters by the Creek. Julie, welcome to the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club.
Thank you.
We're so glad to chat with you. Pamela, you have the first question.
Yes. So I read that the story of Jewel and Claudia during World War II and the polio epidemic was actually your mom's story. She is Jewel, correct? And so I was curious, how much have your own experiences during the coronavirus pandemic kind of found their way into your telling of your mother's story, and how did that influence your writing of it?
Well, I would say that first and foremost, if the coronavirus probably hadn't have hit, I wouldn't have had time to do it. So I had actually started the book while my mother's no longer living, but she would always tell me the story. So I started the book and then just kind of pushed it aside. But then when I had the time and I picked it back up, it was like, wow, what a parallel this is. You know, they couldn't see each other, and my students were sent home. It's like in a matter of just a day. They had no warning and sent home. So it was so similar. And as I wrote it, it's like more and more similarities was so evident, you know, while I was writing it. So
wow.
It definitely influenced a lot of, you know, some of the details that I added to it.
What do you want your readers to take away from the comparisons that you're making between the two pandemics?
To hang in there, because it's bound to get better. At least I pray it will. But yes, that there's always hope, and it might seem, especially for children, a summertime seems like a lifetime for them. And I remember hearing my mother just over and over again saying how awful they thought it was and that they would never get to see each other again. And I'm sure a lot of the children feel that way, or at least they could probably see a lot more light at the end of the tunnel now. But when it first happened and the book first came out, I felt like that it was that the children definitely probably felt hopeless at times, like we're never going to get back to a normal. And although it's not back to normal like the way it was before, it's a lot better. And so that's the biggest thing, is I hope that they will find hope that it will get better, and we will hopefully get back to at least a new norm.
I was going to ask, besides hearing the stories from your mom, what other research did you do to put into the book?
Well, just lots of websites on back in the 40s and what it was like, even as far as like names, because there were a couple. Now, Claudine, Jewel, all of those are the real names. Claudine's sisters, all of those are, I didn't change the names because I wanted it to be as much like the real story. But there were a few names like Charles, baby Charles, you know. I tried to think of some of those names that were a little bit older. My aunt helped me a lot with some names that she remembered that were actually neighbors. I did do the research of the hospitals that they would have to go to. I would hear my mother tell me about that they would have to, because her dad actually got sick and there were not a lot of good hospitals in North Wilkesboro. So they would send them to Statesville and Hickory. And so I did some research on what hospitals were probably the most common ones for the polio, for the victims of polio to go to. And so I did a lot of research on where they would go, how they would treat them, what were the chances, even as far as, because I don't know, did you read the book? So like at the end of the story, the little girl actually didn't have it. She just had something that mimicked polio. So as far as, could that happen? Kind of like COVID now, a lot of people have a bad cold and it mimics all the symptoms of COVID, or I should say COVID does, of a cold. So I did a lot of research on what were the symptoms, how did they treat them, what hospitals did they send them to, and what were the chances that somebody could survive. So quite a bit.
Mhm. That's really great. I'm glad that you were able to really share this book in memory of your mom and really help to keep that story alive. Kelly, did you have one last question?
Well, kind of on that same vein, Marlo, Julie, this was inspired by your mother's stories, right? So that makes me wonder, are there any other mother's stories that are going to be coming out in future books?
Yes, I actually started it and again have kind of pushed it aside. I plan to retire from teaching at the end of this year, so I really want to pick it back up maybe over the summer. And but yes, she told a lot of good stories. So I told someone I might come out with some tales from Blackburn Hollow, or as she would say, Blackburn Holler. But yes, my next story is going to be about actually her pet dog named Buddy. And so I won't say any more, but I do plan to tell some more of the stories, maybe some sequels to this one. I don't know how many, I will actually get written, but I would like to at least have one more in mind. So
it's very exciting. That's such a great tribute. Julie, what would your mom say if she knew that you were bringing all of her stories to life?
Oh gosh, she would be so proud, because she would just think, having her name in a book that was published, she would just be so proud. And that's my biggest regret. I wish that I would have finished the book before she passed away, because she would have loved it, and to see her pictures in the back of the book that I put in there, and her actual home place, and just seeing her name in a book and hearing her story told. She loved to tell stories, and that was just probably a big gift for her, is being able to tell a story herself and then have it written in words. She'd be very proud.
Wow, that is
She was my biggest
fantastic.
cheerleader anyway.
That is fantastic. I'm so glad that you have honored her in this way and have shared this story with all of us. And if you want to purchase Letters by the Creek, please click on the link in the description box of this video. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Our next guest on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club is Dr. Brooksie Sarvant, an intervention coordinator in Wake County and author of 2 titles, Somebody Told You a Lie, a poetic story for young men, and My Heart Leaks Ink, Poetic Expressions for Restoration and Empowerment. Dr. Sturdivant, thank you so much for joining us here on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to chat with you. Amy, what's your question?
So I was reading that on your website, you talked about how kind of your mission statement is equity, empowerment, and education. So how does that kind of play out in your book, Somebody Told You a Lie?
So I'm all about empowering students and countering negative narratives, really digging into stereotypes, where they came from, and just having candid conversations with adults and students. I've had experience working in equity and diversity, so it's just very important to me that students are able to have a fair chance at developing a true identity and being successful. And there are just so many barriers and obstacles that don't have to be. And I think that conversations are just important for addressing things like that. So these books are tools to kind of help facilitate those types of conversations.
I think so often I'm very excited to see that your book is geared towards young men. So often our young gentlemen aren't really reflected in a lot of the books, or they're reflected negatively sometimes as being like the male stereotypes. And I love that it's in the title to draw them in. What prompted you to kind of focus your book toward young men?
So that's definitely an interesting question, because the book includes poems that I actually wrote. So it was very challenging for me to think about, okay, are guys really going to read poems that and at that time a girl wrote? But I tried to choose poems that would be appealing based on the topics that I think that that guys could even relate to. And like you said, there's just so many barriers, specifically with Black males in particular and boys of color. So I felt like we definitely needed to address it. And I have these poems that address certain topics that I know that they experience. So it was almost a why not, like, let's just see how it goes. Because that's definitely an area where we need to start just facilitating the conversations rather than allowing it to be the elephant in the room, actually talk about it. So I just wanted resources and tools so that they can kind of see themselves and start to question some of the things that they hear, believe, and see, and really start to think critically about how that's playing out in our communities.
So I read online that the poems, some of them date back to when you were a teenager. So do you still journal? Like how far back do your journals go, and what prompted you to keep them over all these years?
So my favorite teacher was my 8th grade English teacher. And I remember doing that class, and that was a pretty tough time for me. You can imagine I was 13. So I would say my challenges as a youth started as early as like age 8 is when I really declared, okay, wow, I'm sort of responsible for myself. Like I realized that at 3rd grade, 8 years old. So by 13, you got to imagine from 8 to 13, kids get angry, they start developing fear, shame, and all of that starts to kind of boil over. So this 8th grade English teacher, she really encouraged us to write and do a lot of journaling. We did a lot of reading. So I just fell in love with English at that point, which is why I became an English teacher. But so my writing started pretty much with that class primarily. She had us do a poetry book. So it was kind of like we were forced to write these poems, and she would give us like different criteria, figurative language, use this, use that. But basically we were able to express ourselves freely. And back then we had writing assessments. So this was kind of a free for all, write how you want to write. So I really enjoyed the creativity behind it. And just from there, all through high school, I continued to write. It's almost like she empowered me with that as a tool or a coping mechanism to deal with some of my own challenges. So yeah, that's pretty much when it started. I did continue some, I guess, in undergrad, but by grad school, yeah, I started writing dissertations and the things that come with that. So the creativity didn't get to do that as much. But yeah, that was pretty much my main coping mechanism, I would say from 13, at least through undergrad. And I did some journaling, I guess like diary entry type writing, as well as just the poetic expression.
Dr. Sturdivant, for me, poetry is very personal and is very vulnerable. When you've used your poems with students or groups or adults, does it provide an opportunity to have like an even deeper connection, maybe quicker than it would be using a narrative, like using your own personal poetry?
I've gotten some great responses. So I'm definitely excited about that. I think the students, like, you got these topics that are intriguing to them. It's like, wow, these are things we would love to talk about. And then the creativity with the rhyme, and a lot of them, like if you say them a certain way, you can kind of hear a rhythm. So some of the students are like, oh, this sounds like a rap. I'm like, I don't think I'm a rapper, but okay. So I think that sort of hooks them. Yeah, I think the topics and then the rhyme is definitely intriguing. I do preface it with the backstory so that, like, I'm okay with being vulnerable at this point. I think that's probably why it took me a while to release the books, because I've had the poems forever. It's just like, at what point am I going to be comfortable with sharing this? Because you're right, it's definitely a tough call, but I've got past myself and realized the power that it would bring to others. So that was what encouraged me to go ahead and do it. Just do it. So And like I said, kind of getting through grad school and allowing myself to be creative again. It's like, yay, I'm free now. But yes, so yeah, the vulnerability is there. I still wonder, like, how will people respond? But the other side is like, okay, it's necessary. And that's the whole point. We need to have these conversations. There'll be varying opinions, and that's okay. I really want to hear those perspectives. So I'm excited about what's to come as the word continues to spread.
That's cool. I love the cool cover too for Somebody Told You a Lie. It's so vivid. Can you tell us about the inspiration for the cover?
So I'm definitely pleased with the illustrations all throughout the book, but you're right, that cover is kind of one of the first things you work on to make sure that the illustrator is going to be a good fit, and before they start illustrating the entire book. So we worked a lot on the cover. I basically just kind of had an idea of kind of your stereotypical image of what young men portray or project, and what we kind of see when we look at them. And that's what I wanted to show. Okay, yes, we do have guys, and yes, they do have style, and this is how they show up. I wanted to just go ahead and put it all out there. Yes, this is what we see. So let's dig into that. Where are the images coming from? Where are the ideas coming from? What's kind of behind the mask, so to speak? So yes, that was kind of what we had in mind. I definitely wanted to appeal to some of our urban youth, those exposed to some challenges. So yeah, that's kind of the target audience. Yes.
Yeah, it's great. Well, Dr. Sturdivant, we certainly appreciate you coming by and talking about your work with us, and we appreciate you putting it out and sharing it with the world. And if you want to purchase one of Dr. Sturdivant's books, please visit her website, 3ellc.org. We'll be right back. We are back on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club, and our next guest is Gemette McEachern, principal of New Century International Middle School in Cumberland County and the author of Unforgiveness, Let It Go or Die With It. Ms. McEachern, welcome to the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club.
Thank you.
We're so glad to chat with you. Kelly, you have the first question.
Thank you, Marlo. So my question for you is, how do you take your beliefs and kind of have them manifest in the workplace when like religions and views are so very different?
Well, I would say it's more of a personal choice, that something that I choose to do and something that I choose to live by. I don't go around trying to push my beliefs and views on others. I just make sure that I personally live by what the Word of God says for myself. And I do apply it to my workspace. I'm constantly praying for my students. I am praying for their families. I'm praying especially for my staff. And there are times, because being a school administrator is tough, and you run into so many different obstacles throughout the day. And parents and teachers, they will test you and they will make you mad. And so I have learned that I can't hold on to the hurts, the pain, being talked about, that I have to let it go, and I have to choose to do that even in the workplace. So that's kind of how I apply that, but keep it personal at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think it's so difficult for people to forgive? Because that's, the overall message in your book, the importance of forgiveness. What do you think it is that causes people just to hold on to that pain or those grudges?
Well, I would have to speak for myself. For me, I felt as if I was repaying that person back for the things that they had caused or done to me. So holding on to it was easy for me. There are times when people are angry and upset with other people and they feel that they have a right to be. And oftentimes they do, but you don't have the right to just hold on to it for years and years and not deal with the hurt and deal with the pain. So oftentimes I would say that that's why people hold on to unforgiveness.
I saw in the book that there is a checklist right in I believe it's right in the beginning. And they're like 4 little things. How often have you had to give yourself that little assessment? It was like, do you remember the offense? Are you holding on to it? Maintaining negative emotions? You want revenge, or you are uncomfortable with the person's presence when you're trying to figure out if you're living in unforgiveness. So how often have you had to give yourself that same assessment in situations?
Every day. I have to be honest, every single day. And I'll speak from a parent perspective. Sometimes my kids will do things, and as a mom, I have found myself, asking myself, like, are you still penalizing Erin for what she did? Have you let it go? And oftentimes I have to check myself, like, you still mad at her for what she did yesterday. You haven't let it go, because look at how you're treating her, because I haven't forgotten. And it depends on what the situation is, but it's a daily check for me. I think because it was something that I have battled with. So it's definitely a daily check for me with my kids, on my job. Sometimes things carry over from the previous day, and I have to say, okay, did you speak to her? Even though, y'all may have exchanged some words at work, did you get it right? Are you still holding on? And even with kids, sometimes the kids can do things at work and you can be mad at them and haven't let it go, and you can tell. So that that assessment is done daily for me.
I know in your book you talk a lot about somebody who is very close to you, who hurt you, and you held on to that, and you got to that point where you realized you needed to make it right, or come to terms with it. Was there a catalyst or something that spurred like that realization that I've got to let this go?
Oh, yes. There were goals that I had set for myself and aspirations that I had. And I got to a point in my life where nothing was happening for me. I felt stuck in my career. I felt stuck spiritually. And that's when the Lord, I was ready to get married, and I hadn't gotten married. I was always the bridesmaid and never the bride. And dealing with this unforgiveness that I was holding on to my heart, I realized that it was holding up a lot of things in my life, and I needed to do something different. And so when I began to deal with that area in my life, that's when things just took off for me. Got married and started having kids, and all the other stuff began to happen. I took off in my career. So that was kind of the thing when I found myself being stuck.
What a great lesson for us all. We certainly appreciate you coming on and being so transparent with us and telling us bits of your story. And if you want to read the complete story, please purchase her book, Unforgiveness, Let It Go or Die With It. You can go to her website, theleadinggem.com. When we return, we'll have one more conversation of this special episode. We'll be right back. We are back on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club, and our last guest is Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, lead teacher at Swain County High School and author of Even As We Breathe. Annette, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We're so happy to chat with you. Pam, what's your question?
So I know that you write historical fiction, and so I'm curious, parts of your story, such as like the Grove Park Inn and Resorts being used as an internment camp during World War II for some prisoners, if that was part of the historical or if that was part of the fiction. And then as a follow-up, kind of a two-parter, as a follow-up, when you write, do you like to focus more on the historical, going into a lot of that kind of research, or do you like to focus on the fiction aspect and being able to manipulate the facts a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Well, the fact that the Grove Park Inn held access diplomats and foreign nationals as prisoners of war the summer of 1942 is actually true. And when I learned that piece of history, it really kind of propelled the whole novel, the initial interest for the whole novel. I've grown up in Western North Carolina and lived here my whole life. And I just recently learned that piece of our history. So I was really excited about how the setting, both the time and the place, and the circumstances could really drive the novel. To answer the second part of your question, so my husband is a former history teacher. He's in administration now. And so writing historical fiction scares me to death because I'm afraid I'm going to get something wrong. So I love being a fiction writer in general because I like that latitude. And in fact, I tell people that with this book, I didn't even clue, I don't know, it just didn't connect with me that I was writing historical fiction until I was talking to my publisher about the marketing plan and how it's categorized. I was like, well, yeah, I mean, it was 1942, it is historical fiction, but the themes and the motifs in the book are really, they feel really contemporary and relevant for me because it does discuss a lot of political and social issues, specifically citizenship and how race and class play into citizenship, specifically during times of war.
So I grew up not far down the road from you. I grew up in Murphy. And so I know that Swain's such a tight-knit, special community. So how does that kind of portray into your writing and who you are as a person?
Yeah, so I think it really influences everything that I write. I want to bring this community's voice at the Paula Boundary, Swain County, in a way that is authentic and not, we live in the mountains and we get stereotyped sometimes. And so I just want to bring, kind of a different lens to looking at our community and what may be from the outside interpreted one way, how it's really functioning. And so regardless of what the plot is, I try to infuse those sensibilities and characters. And, I think place is so important to the influence on people and communities. And so I really do focus a lot about how this landscape really has created our value system here.
Love that.
So, Ms. Clapsaddle, your books, this one we're discussing here, and I think the future one is potentially placed in North Carolina. Was having it in North Carolina and having like the nature and the surroundings of the state as almost a character in your books kind of important to you? I mean, it probably was, but why was it important to you?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, the history of the Grove Park was really an impetus for the plot itself. But even beyond that, and as I look to like the next book that I'm writing currently, I think that North Carolina is important. I'm still a far west writer. This is what I'm familiar with. But even the juxtaposition between Cherokee, North Carolina, and Asheville, North Carolina is pretty stark and important because it allows for the opportunity to talk about how diverse those cultures are in such close proximity that we're not we're not as homogeneous as people assume we are, even in just Western North Carolina. So if we look across the state in general, it's a very rich state in terms of diversity on all levels, right, of people and cultures and the environment itself. And I am very influenced by my natural environment. I mountain bike, for example, and that's almost part of my process now, is that I'm out in the middle of woods periodically. It just really has become ingrained in what I write.
That's cool. Now, I know you teach a Cherokee Studies class, which I think is so great. And I don't know, do we have Cherokee Studies available anywhere else in the state? I'm just curious. Even as I was reading, I'm thinking, who else is teaching Cherokee Studies? That is cool. Are you able to use Even As We Breathe within that class and be able to expose this text to your students?
So we offer Cherokee Studies in Swain County. Graham County offers it, and Cherokee Central Schools offer it. At one point, Jackson County did as well. But what's really neat is that there are Cherokee Studies classes. I know at UNCA, UNC Asheville, and UNC Chapel Hill, and there may be others that I'm not familiar with. And so it's kind of expanding, and the UNC system has actually, this is a little bit ironic, but has accepted Cherokee language as a foreign language credit coming out of high school. So that's really neat. And I haven't used the book in my classroom, not in my Cherokee Studies nor my English classroom, because I just feel weirded out by it. And the students talk about it sometimes. Are we going to read it in your class? And then they decide they don't want to read it because they're afraid they're going to get something wrong. And then I'm right there. So no, we haven't adopted it in my classroom, but it has been selected as one of 5 novels for NC Reads. And so communities can get class sets. And so our school and the middle school have applied to get, because it's 15 books, and y'all know you need more than 15 books for a class set. So we both applied so that maybe we can get a full class set, that if somebody wants to teach it, I don't think it'll be me, but they can teach it. Cherokee Central Schools, I know, has taught it. And UNC Asheville has, there's a class or two that have taught it that I'm aware of.
That is really cool. And don't feel weird about it. Professors do it all the time. They make us read their books.
And buy them.
And buy their books. Oh my gosh. And Annette, thank you so much for joining us. To purchase Even As We Breathe, please visit Annette's website, Saunooke, Clapsaddle.com. We want to thank everyone so much for watching this special episode of the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club. We'll see you all next month.
Thank you.